Done some setup and prep using a map that I got from the Advanced Animated Dungeon Maps patron. So the information for that will be posted at the end of the video. But essentially this is a paid content thing where they give you an exclusive map every month. And this one happens to be Sea Witch's Coven, which is actually one of my favorite tropes for fantasy. So I'm going to take the map and import it into Fantasy Grounds and kind of illustrate how to do that. And then I'm going to apply the line of sight and any other sort of things that I want to include. And then on top of that, if there's time, I'll start building out some of the NPCs and that sort of thing. So this video is going to be a little bit longer than normal, but hopefully we don't have any crashes or anything major happening. And I'll comment along the way as to what I'm doing and the sorts of things that might be included in some of your game prep, depending on how in depth you want to go and how much you're familiar with your content and also the Fantasy Grounds Unity platform. So this also assumes that you have at least a standard license and a little bit of content. In this particular case, I don't really need a lot of stuff right now because I'm actually going to be building out the content in Fantasy Grounds, and I'm just going to use the SRD. So the SRD is just kind of your footprint or your base to work upon, and I'm only using that just so I have a little bit of a framework in case I want to test something. But in general, whenever you're building maps or anything like that, you can do that in the core rules and it'd be the same experience as you would in any other rule set. So the map part of this is pretty universal. So that's what I'm going to be starting with is, how do you import the map, putting the line of sight on there, some considerations for gameplay, those sort of things. And then if we get time, then I'll start diving into more of the D&D side of things. So what we're going to do now is in the campaign setup, we have a way that we can set up the desktop for our needs. So this says show on load, so I'm going to unclick that because if I come back to this campaign later after I close it, I don't want this to pop up again. And I'm going to hit next. So you have some choices. You can either click the modules thing and load up all your modules if you want, or whatever content you want to use. In this case, I'm just going to click on the SRD. That's the system reference documents. So you have a bestiary with no art. You have the data, which is like a very small data set, which everything's kind of built around. And then you have some magic items that you can use if needed. Not much artwork or fanciness to it, or tables, not a whole lot of stuff. So it's just real basics. This is what you get free with the Fantasy Grounds platform if you use the D&D 5e rule set. So this is just the bare bones stuff. And then I'm going to hit next. And I don't need to mess with the options because I'm really not playing right now. So I'll just go ahead and hit finish. So the first things first is whenever you start a new campaign, you probably want to obviously just take a new session and create that. And then launch into Fantasy Grounds and then kind of get all the things set up. So what I'm doing now is going to import a map. So this is setting the stage. So I'm going to create an encounter or maybe even a 1 or 3 shot adventure for a mid-tier group of players. And this is going to involve the Sea Witch's Cave, the map. So I'm going to build an adventure around the map. Instead of building an adventure and trying to find a map to fit, I am going to build the actual content around the map. That way, it's not hard to adapt, and I can kind of use creativity to kind of dance around what's already in place. Because quite often we start a project like an adventure, and then we're trying to look for images to fit what we're trying to do. In this case, a much easier way to do this is to find something, some artwork or some kind of picture or whatever it is to inspire you to create your own content. Now, it may not fit in a long-term campaign, but for a one-shot, you definitely can do something like this. So without further ado, I'm going to actually bring in the material that I have for this particular item. So we have some audio playing right now. This is called Ocean Coast Nighttime. This was made by Monument Studio. So I'm kind of playing that in the background. Hopefully it's not too loud where it's drowning out my voice or becoming too annoying. But I use that for mood music to kind of help me stay focused on what I'm trying to do, and it kind of takes away the doldrums of having fans and people talking in the background. So it kind of allows my imagination and my creativity to come out. So I do play a little soft music in the background just in case, so I have kind of a really good mood set for creating. So that's why the sound is in the background. It should be really subtle. The other thing is that, of course, I mentioned earlier that this is from a patron. It's exclusive. This is a paid thing. So if you are a patron of Advanced Animated Dungeon Maps, this will be in your August folder, so they'll send it to you if you're at the right tier. I'm not really trying to promote them, but I do want to give them some kind of recognition for their hard work, and I'm also going to be using their content. So I think it's fair that I mention them and link in the chat after the video. So if you're interested in subscribing to these guys, this is where I got the map from. And then as far as the content goes, I have a downloads folder. And what one of the things that is very important in Fantasy Grounds is to actually organize the content. So this is important. So I'm going to create a folder, and this is my downloads folder. So I'm going to call this the Sea Coven or Sea Witch Coven or something like that, just so I have a starting place. And I have a place to dump everything that I'm going to be downloading for this particular adventure. So this is the map that's in WebM format. And I'm hovering over the map, and I notice that it's in a VPN 9 format, so I'm going to have to convert that for Fantasy Grounds. Also, there's some content here that is probably related, so I'm going to bring those into that folder. And then I'm going to go into the folder itself and take a look at what these zip files are, make sure they're the right content, because I don't remember what the file names were. So this is actually Cyberpunk, so I'm going to take that and actually move this back out, because this has nothing to do with this particular map. And then these two, I believe, are the static maps. So I'm going to extract all these out. And then there is also some kind of assets that go along with this, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and extract all those out and get them ready to go. So it's important that you organize this content before you start putting it into Fantasy Grounds, because I don't know how many times I've done this, and then I lose the file name and I forget what I called it. And all these little sort of things that can make things more difficult. Yeah, so these are the maps without animation, so I want those too. It's for reference, and maybe you want a DM's map. So these are Cyberpunk, so I'm going to move those out of this folder, because I did download some Cyberpunk stuff too today. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that out here, and then go back to the Witch's Coven. I don't need this anymore. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Control Z to undo, and then go back to the Witch's Coven. Okay, so here are the maps, and there is an animated map here, but the issue here is that this is going to cause problems with Fantasy Grounds, and I have a program installed called Media Info, and if you hover over the object, you get a tooltip. So it does also have audio, so we got to remove the audio too, but it's 1920 by 1080, which is a good size. That's HD. And it says VP9, so I got to convert this over to a VP8 file. So I'm going to be using a program called Shutter Encoder. It's a really good program. It works pretty good for this type of thing. So basically, it's a little app that you can install on your computer. It is available for Mac and Linux. So I'm going to drag and drop the maps here. This is the Advanced Dungeon Maps. And when I get this back, when it kicks out the information, I'm going to rename it, because I don't like the titles. And this is one of the things you want to do before you import it into Fantasy Grounds. But I'm going to go ahead and convert it. So I'm going to drag and drop this, and it says that it contains invalid characters. Okay, so that's because it has this, what do you call it, this apostrophe. So we don't want that in the description. So I want to go ahead and bring that back up. I'm going to clear this. and I'm going to drag it back over. So take this, I'm going to go ahead and rename it now. So I'll just call it Witch's Coven Map. See Witch's Coven Map. That's what I'm going to call it. See Witch's Coven Map. So they put an apostrophe in here, which is not an acceptable character. So that's why it gave me that grief. And then from there, I'm going to copy and paste the title here and do the same thing, but I'll leave the description on there that says gridded, because then I want to know the difference. And then there's one that's not gridded. So if you're going to do maps that are already built for Fantasy Grounds, it's better to find maps that don't have a grid on them. Even though if you know the scale and everything, sometimes it's easier just to put a grid on something that doesn't already have one. Because if the grid is off or it's distorted in any way, it's really tough to line up the Fantasy Grounds grid. So now that that's going, let's go back to the conversion process. So again, I'm using the Shutter encoder. I'm going to drag and drop this in here. And once it does that, I'm going to choose the function. So we're going to go with VP8, because right now we determined it's a VP9. So we go with VP8. And now over here on the right-hand side, it gives you the specs. And you can actually change the duration. You can do all recolor. You can do all kinds of things. But one of the things I want to do is make sure that there's no audio. Fantasy Grounds will not accept WebM files with audio. And a lot of these have audio baked into them because they were originally converted with a map that has a little bit of music or background noise to it. So you got to take out that audio. So here, click on audio settings, and it says Opus. That's a standard format for the output. But I'm going to go ahead and click no audio, and that actually cuts down the file size just a tiny bit too. And then the other thing is that this is a map that's kind of a flat image, but if you had a token or something, you'd want to preserve the actual, and if you go to advanced features and you want to click on enable alpha channel if you're using tokens, that way you can preserve the outside of it where it would have all of those particular transparency, so that way it's not black or white in the background. And then another way to know what file format this is, if you don't have a way to do it within your Windows Explorer, is you can right click on the file name and then go to file information, and a window will pop up, and if you scroll down, see it said VP9, which is the problem that you're going to have with Fantasy Grounds. So I just want to let you know how that works. So once you're done with that, and you got the audio stripped out or deselected, and then you can play around with the file size a little, but I wouldn't mess with it because it might distort the overall dimension. So you got to be careful with how you mess around with the compression. I usually do a 2-pass on there. That if you only got one file, I mean, that's fine. But if you're going to convert multiple files, that may not be an option for you. And remember that if you got more than like 10 files here, it's going to take a while to convert all those. So if you're going to do a massive conversion, you want to make sure that you do it in groups, or that you run a big batch when you're going to sleep at night or something like that, because it'll tie up your computer. So I would keep the amount that you're doing at the same time kind of down to a minimum if possible. And then since I got this up, I'm going to go ahead and start the function. So it's going to do the conversion. You have like a progress bar on the bottom, and when it'll let you know when it's done. And I think it is already done. It's 100%. So once that's done, I can go ahead and close this. And then there was a little log file that it generated temporarily, but here is the file. So I don't know if it actually converted or not. Look, maybe it gave me an error or something. I have to check that out. So I want to go back to the Shutter encoder. Yeah, I don't see the file that I converted. So let me go back here. I think what happened is I changed the name of this when I was actually going to do this. So now I want to go to VP8. And then I want to go to the audio settings and cut the audio out by selecting no audio. And that should be it. And then go ahead and hit the start function. So now it's going. Yeah, that's what happened is I changed the name of the file I was loading. So that's a no-no. So it's going to work in the background. As you can see, it takes, you know, less than 10 seconds, but when you have a bunch of files, it'll be problematic sometimes. So go ahead and close this now. And I have two files now. I have this one that has an underscore VP8, and then this is the original. So I'm just going to delete the original because I don't need it. It's no use to me. However, I do still have the original file that I downloaded from the patron, but I'm going to go ahead and delete that because this is the folder that I'm going to take and put into Fantasy Grounds. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the downloads folder, and I'm going to copy this entire folder. Actually, I'm going to cut it because I don't want to keep it doubled up in my files. And then I want to go to Fantasy Grounds itself. So I'm going to close this. And let's go into Fantasy Grounds. And what we're going to do is go into the library and go to Assets. So that's up here on the right. And whenever you do something in Fantasy Grounds, when you add content, it's going to be in this Assets area. A little bit of confusion might come because you don't have a folder, a campaign folder yet. But in this case, I'm going to be importing images, which covers handouts, maps, everything, you know, whatever you want. So I'm going to click on image, and there's no campaign folder yet now. But what I'm going to do is click on folder, and it'll bring up the back end of Fantasy Grounds in the exact folder that I want to put this map in. So I'm going to hit Control V to paste the map in here. And here's the C, which is Coven. I want to take one last look at this before I import it. Yeah, so this is just a file naming convention that you want to get in the habit of doing before you make these conversions. So these are both JPEG files, so they shouldn't be too big. And then I want to make sure that the files are named accordingly to what I want, not just some random number or something. Because when you import these, if you don't know the name of the file, and if it's like X359A7, you know, that's not going to help you. The other thing I'm going to do is put a little file name attachment in front of it. So I'm going to put map and then comma and then do that. And I'll do the same thing with this because I want it to sort in Fantasy Grounds in the asset list. And then this one I'm going to put animated instead of map because okay, so that way it differentiates between what they are. So now that I have those named and organized, and you can make subfolders, whatever you want to do. So I might do that. So I might take a new folder. And I'm going to call this static maps. So these are just the regular maps. And I'm going to put these in there. And then I'm going to make another folder. Let's see, right click, new folder. And this one is going to be animated maps. So when you get these in Fantasy Grounds and you're in your campaign settings, you can actually see what maps what you've imported. And it helps keep the organization. So I'll go ahead and drag this over. And now that let's assume you got everything done, I'm going to close the back end, and you got to hit this refresh. So whenever you change file names or move files around or rename them and all that sort of thing, you need to hit this refresh. And once you do that, this campaign folder will show up for the first time, and then after that, it will always remain there as long as you have content in there. So now when I click on this, this is going to take me to the subfolder, and then I have my two folders here for organizational purpose. So there's the static maps. So when you click on this, you can kind of see the preview of it. And this is the one that has a grid on it. And then I'll go over to the animated map. And one way you can check to see if it worked is when you go into your campaign folder, if this is a white box or it's blank, then likely it's not the right format. So if you have audio attached to it, or if it's a VP9 file or some other format, or it's broken or corrupted, it's not going to show up here. So this is a good sign, and that this is actually going to work. So that's how you import files. You organize them. You make sure they're correct. Make sure the file names match what you want. You can leave the original file names if you want for reference, but I went ahead and did that. So now what I'm going to do is in Fantasy Grounds, in the campaign section, I'm going to go to images. So I could take the images from the asset folder and drag them individually into this particular group. But in this case, I want to make my own group. So I drop down with the arrow, click the green plus button, and it defaults as group 1. So I'm going to go ahead and click the edit list, and I'm going to highlight that and type over it. So I'm going to just call this Witches Coven, because that's what this is. So Witches Coven, I'll just say adventure. Okay, so this is what I'm going to call all the different data types that I make in Fantasy Grounds, and it will have its own group. So this is just a habit thing. You don't have to do this, but what it does is it segregates and organizes your content. So that way, when you have a big whopping list of stuff, you don't have to sort through thousands of entries. You can just click on the group and it'll filter it out. And now that that's happened, and let's just pretend I got everything going, like all the tokens, all the artwork and such. You can click on create from campaign assets, or you can use this import arrow, which will allow you to import files individually, or in one at a time, or in small groups, or you can do it all at once with this button up here called create from campaign assets. So if I click on that, it's going to give me a warning message. Are you sure you want to import all the campaign image records? I'll say yes. So here are all the files that I have imported. And what's nice is it sorts already, because I've already made a change to the file names. So now if I have more than one map or more assets in here, it's going to sort them out by this first name for alphanumeric. And like if I have a handout, I'll call it handout, comma, whatever the handout is. So this is very important for navigating and finding your files when you're running your game. So this is something that you're going to have to learn or adopt to, or eventually get to when you get to this point. And now I'm going to bring up the animated map, and I'm going to close this images folder for now. And then I'm going to stretch this out, because I'm going to be putting line of sight on there and taking a look at it. Yeah, so there's some moving water on here, like bubbling water. And I imagine that this might be, either these might be populated with the sea witches, or perhaps they are the lair of some kind of creature that helps them out. You can see there's some stalagmites in here. Looks like some sea anemones and some sea creatures. And then these snail shells, which is a really nice little feature there. And then over here on the right, there's an entryway that you can use as a point of egress or a point of entry. And then I was also thinking that since you have these 3 pools, there's going to be a coven of witches. So maybe I'll place them in those pools, and they'll be hiding in it. When the adventurers come in the cave, they pop up out of the pool. So that would be kind of cool. And then, of course, these shells are just, where the water is collected. And that's kind of like their bed, or like their little nest or whatever. And then in here, I might put an octopus or some kind of creature in here that kind of protects their lair for them, or maybe some minions. And you can see there's another point of egress out here. So if you need to expand the map or go to another location, they've kind of left those open for you. So that's pretty neat. So I want to go ahead and grab put a grid on it. That's the first thing we want to do whenever you put line of sight on a map. And sometimes the line of sight and the image don't always jive, so you don't always need to put line of sight on everything, but we do need a starting grid. And one of the things that's helpful to know is the actual pixels per grid. So this is 1920 by 1080. So it's probably anywhere from 60 to 140, depending on what the map was originally made for. Some of the maps that are created for other virtual tabletops, such as Foundry, will be higher file size and resolution. If it's for Roll20, it's usually 70 or 140. The recommended size for Fantasy Grounds now is 100. It used to be 50. And then there's some other formats. So you could try with those first if you don't know the actual dimensions. The other thing you want to do is possibly go back to wherever your source and take a look and see what their other maps are scaled at to get a better idea of this. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and go to the grid. And I'm going to turn on the grid, and as you can see, this isn't the right size. This is 50 by 50. This looks a little bit big or small, depending on how you want to look at it. So I'm going to try 60 and see if that helps. And that looks like it's right. So I was pretty close. So 60. You can also make this 120 if you want the scale of this to look a little bit smaller. I kind of like this a little bit bigger, but if you went to 120, let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so that's a little small, and I don't think it lines up quite what, I mean, you can move the map, but I don't think it was designed for that. It looks kind of small, but it would work too. So it just depends on how big you want the sea cave to represent. In this case, you can kind of get away with it because you don't really have a true scale. You don't have a door or some kind of furniture or building, so you can get away with changing, like doubling or halving the amount. So in this case, I think I'm going to stick with 60. I don't know. What do you guys think? 60 or 120? So this is 120. I mean, I can move the map so it fits the grid, or I can just go back to 60, and I will change that, and it will scale like that. And this, I think this was the true intent here. So that would make these caverns a lot larger. So this cavern entryway would be like almost 30 feet across instead of just 5 or 10 feet. So that's kind of a consideration that you need to consider when you're actually putting this line of sight on your maps, or if you're drawing your own content. There's some things that you got to think about. If the squares are too narrow, like between this point and the wall, if it's only like 20 feet or less, you'll get like traffic jams if you got players going through there, especially if they're in the middle of combat and you got this little choke point. It's very hard to navigate the tokens through there. Sometimes the players will get stuck in the walls and such, so that can be rather annoying. So that's something you want to consider. But I don't like the white grid. It's kind of washed out. So I want to go ahead and put a color on this. So I'm still in the grid area. I'm going to go to tint, and I'm going to click on like maybe this light blue to kind of theme it for the water and the ocean. And then I'm going to turn it down the opacity a little bit so it's not too annoying. And now it's going to make this pop a little bit better. It's going to kind of match in a way, and it looks a lot better on the eyes. So this is something you'll have to play with to decide whether or not you want to adjust these. But I like the fact that I can still see the grid, but it's not too, like, I don't need it like that. That's way too obnoxious. So I think, you know, right just under halfway looks pretty good to me, depending on your eyesight and if you're colorblind and those sort of things. But in this case, I think that looks pretty decent. Not too bad. So the other thing I want to do in this case is I want to make sure that I have the at least the outside of the walls taken care of. I don't have to really do anything too fancy because it's a cavern, but one of the things I want to avoid is I don't want too many occluder points. So that's a bunch of those little dots. So you don't really need to have 50 gazillion of them. You don't have to go right up to the edge on every contour. So what I'm going to do is go to the line of sight tool, which is this brick wall symbol. And then I'm going to go to the wall symbol, which is the occluder. So the occluder line of sight walls block light and movement. So I'm going to go ahead and draw. I'm going to go into line mode. And I'm just going to click just kind of casually on the outsides of this wall cavern. And just kind of roughly go around it. I don't want to go right up to the edge because I want the players to see the map and all the details that were put into it. Because it kind of sucks if you have a beautiful map and then you come in and you block the occluder, or you block the artwork with the occluder, and then they don't see any of this fine detail that went into making the map. So you don't have to be 100% accurate on these walls. This is just a way to block movement and light, and it doesn't allow players to walk through walls. That's all you're trying to do. You're not really making a wall per se in this case, because the walls are defined by the image, and if you get close enough on the outside, it will work, and it also gives a little bit more breathing room for when the players are traversing through this area. You don't get those choke points, especially on a map that's smaller or that has some form of narrowing where it's hard to get through. So this is all I'm doing, is taking these and just kind of placing these around. And if you notice, I'm not going right to the edge. I'm not capturing every little nook and cranny. Hey, that's brilliant. I've struggled. Yeah, see, that's definitely something I've struggled with too. That's how I know not to do it. So when I do that with this map, I try not to go too close to the edge, because when you have a map that's crowded or it has a lot of activity going on, or a point where it narrows down, there tends to be a buildup or a pileup, and that can be really aggravating. And if the square is smaller than 5 feet, your players are going to get stuck and you're going to have to move them. So yeah, that's definitely a thing. Now, when I get to the very end, I'm going to click on this point, double click, and that'll join. And that's it. Now, there's something you can do if you think you've gone overboard, or if you want to make some adjustments. So if you're all done with the line of sight, which I'm not, but I'm going to just do this for demonstration. So I want to go to the selection mode now and make my adjustments. Try not to do this as you go, because you're going to be switching back and forth between tools, and that's where you lose a lot of time. You want to try to stay in the same tool as long as possible before switching to another tool, because that's where you lose time. If you keep going and drawing and then changing it, drawing and changing it, you're losing more time doing that than actually doing the map. So put in all of your occluder points first before you make those adjustments, and then go back and fix. See, like this thing here, I got a little too close, I think. But it's not that big of a deal. This is just a cavern map, so it's going to be helpful if you just kind of back off, relax. It doesn't have to be perfect. And also just know that you can go back and adjust it when you need to. You don't have to adjust it as you go. Now, some people like doing it like that. They're very, anal retentive about it, or they're very picky. But the more picky you are, the longer it's going to take, and it's generally not worth it. Now, if this is a commercial product that you're going to sell, yeah, maybe spend a little bit more time on it. But for setting up for just like homebrew encounters and stuff, there's no need to get that definite. You don't need to define it as finite. And then one of the tools that comes with Fantasy Grounds that they put in here in case you have too many occluders, which are all these little dots, right? You got hundreds of them. Caverns are probably notoriously bad or problematic, I should say, with this particular issue. So I'm going to come over here and make a couple other little adjustments. And then once you've got to the point where you're happy with where the lines are, now if you double click, you have to be in the selection tool. So if you double click, that selects every single point in here. And there's a tool called Simplify Selected Occluders. So what that does is it removes like a quarter or maybe even an eighth of the dots here. Some of these are probably redundant. They don't need to be there. And this cleans up the amount of points that you have. So in case you went too far or you got too overzealous, this is a way that you can go in and fix that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this down arrow. And as you can see, it's removed some of those points. Once in a while, it'll remove a point that's critical. And you can always go in there and you can hit Control Z and undo it. So I'll do that just in case. And that'll put all the points back. But in this case, I want to get rid of some of the occluders. I don't need every single little dot. So I'll go ahead and do that. And it gets rid of, like, probably maybe a quarter or 1/8 of the little occluders. So you don't want to do that more than once or twice, because then it's going to start taking away some of your geometry and stuff. You don't want that. So this is basically now refined enough to play, and it's not going to be as difficult or as much lag on your system, because that's what causes, or one of the reasons that causes a lag, is you got way too many occluders, your map is too big, and you got too much going on. It's too busy, basically, is what happens. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some, a little bit of, I guess, on the shells here. I'm just going to put a little bit of terrain on there. because you can't really see on top of these. They almost go to the ceiling of the cave, but you could technically climb on top of these. So I'm just going to put a little bit of and then around these things, I need to continue those. I forgot about the stalagmite, so I'll go ahead and put those in. So what you can do with the stalagmite to make this a little bit easier, instead of clicking around like I did before, is you can use the ellipse tool to get a rough shape. And then I want to make sure I'm in the wall tool. And I can left click and drag and get just the rough shape of the contour. And these are not pillars, so I'm going to go back and adjust these, but they kind of act like pillars. So those are the stalagmites or the parts of the cave that are not exposed. And then I'm going to go back to the pointer, the selection tool, and then just kind of come in here and make some adjustments. And like I said, you don't need to be right up to the edge. And this kind of gives a feel of more of a natural surface instead of a complete circle. So again, I'm just kind of going through and kind of making some adjustments. Nothing major, no big deal. You don't need to get all worried about it and all weirded out. That's what happens when you're kind of new to this feature in Fantasy Grounds, is you get kind of weirded out and trying to get too perfect, and that's gonna really piss you off, is really all it's gonna do. So you just want to look at this as something casual. You're setting this up for your friends usually, and it's not critical that you have every single thing right, or you're just going to drive yourself nuts. It's not worth it. Let's put it that way. It's supposed to be fun, and my rule of thumb is if it takes more than an hour, it's not worth it. So that's just words to live by. All right, so now that I have those dealt with, now I'm going to switch to the terrain tool, which it only blocks light and not movement. So all I'm going to be doing is just putting that around these shells, because the players can't technically see through those. So I'm in the line tool now and terrain. I'm just going to make just a light terrain, and see I'm on the inside here, not all the way to the edge, so the players can still see the definition of the shell. And then I'm just taking these and making them casually. Really no point in trying to make it perfect. So there's one shell, and then here's the other one. And I'm just kind of doing this so when the players come in here, they can't see through the seashells. So there could be some strategic advantage, like maybe one of the sea witches is trying to hide or something like that. So that's basically it. And then this one here might be a little bit taller, so I might just put a little dome around here. That'll just kind of, I guess, indirectly show a little bit of elevation, but not much. And then the water itself already has an effect on here. So if this is a static map, I'd probably put in some kind of map, some kind of way to illustrate that. But that's pretty much all I need to do for this map. The other thing I need to worry about, though, is these entrances. So do I want these to be an exit and entrance? Well, they were actually designed for that, so I'll go ahead and put that in here. So if you're going to use a door tool, in this case, since it's not a square door and it's an actual opening, what I'm going to do is I just noticed this little crab coming out of the wall. How cool. I didn't even notice that before. This little crab comes out of this cavern. That's pretty neat. Okay, so basically I'm going to go... Oh, there he goes. It's like a shadow or something. So I'm going to go to the door tool, and I'll use the line tool instead of the square tool because I want to kind of contour it with the way this is shaped. So I'm just going to left click and kind of click here and just kind of click around, because this isn't a perfect doorway. It's kind of it's a sea cave. So, but once you double click, it removes that center line. And then if you want to adjust this, you can later. But I'm going to go ahead and do the other door first, and then I'll make any adjustments I want to make there. So over here is the other doorway. So I'm going to go ahead and put the door in here, just so you have some kind of, even though it doesn't go anywhere, it gives you, the players, the idea that there's an exit or an entrance. So I'm going to do the same thing. Just going to come through here and make the doorway really casual. There's no stress here. And as you can see, it removes that center line as part of the new features for the line of sight. So that was that was introduced last summer, I think. So, all right. So now what I'm going to do is make my adjustment. So I switch to the selection tool, and I might pull this down a little bit. And you got to make sure these are connected. So I'm going to make sure that there's a vertice there. And I'll just single click on this extended point and hit delete. So I want to make sure that's connected, because the light will leak out of there if it isn't. All right, so just go like this, and just gonna, oops, see there again, that wasn't connected. So I want to make sure it's connected. That's what I'm doing. Now that I have that there, so I'm just kind of cleaning it up a little bit. It didn't need to be this thick, but this was just the initial lines. So I'm just kind of going around and fixing the contour a little bit. There we go. So that's a little bit more natural to the cavern walls. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. So come up here and just kind of bring this in a little bit. I don't want to make the door too small, because what happens is when you're in gameplay, and if you have the doors too thin, what will happen is it'll get really annoying, because you won't be able to click on the door when you're in play mode. So you don't want these to be too thin. So if you're zoomed way out like this and you try to do that, oh, one message was deleted by a moderator. Huh, interesting. Wonder what that was. Probably spam. Fussy Festivity for 300 seconds. Huh. I don't know who Fussy Festivity is, but there you go. That serve you right. All right, so now with the doors in there, if you get lost, like your map gets kind of off-centered, if you drop down this tool up here, you can click on this zoom to fit, and it'll kind of bring it back up to center. Or you can right-click, go to view, and zoom to fit, and it'll also do the same thing. Now what I want to do is I'm going to put a little bit of effects on this, like fog or something, real light, because I don't want it to cover the map. So I'm going to come over and go to down here, the effects tool, add an effects layer. That layer is above this layer. And then I'm going to go to the effects tool up here on top, and I'm going to pick mist. So you kind of got this mist going on, and this isn't exactly what I'm going to have it do. I'm going to have it swirl. So I'm going to actually get two different mist patterns going, and then I'll have them move in two different directions so that they actually look like they're swirling around in the cavern rather than blowing through, because there shouldn't be any wind in here. So now what I'm going to do is take this pattern here, this top pattern, and I'm going to slow it down. So when you put it in the center, it's basically neutral. So I'm going to put it over here at 47. And then this other layer, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to put it at 53. And then I want to turn down the actual speed of it. So I'll go with 53 on the speed on this one. Because, see, I lowered the opacity so it's not too much. And then I'm going to go to the other one and change the speed as well. And then that'll be at 47. I just matched them just so it's easier for me. They don't have to be exactly matched. Okay, so there's that kind of swirling effect I was telling you about. You could make it look like the steam or whatever is swirling. So the next step is I'm going to put on a mask on each one of these layers. So I'm going to put a mask on there. And I'm only going to draw... You can either draw around this, or I'm just going to confine it to the map space. And then I'll do the same thing for this one. I'm gonna blur it a little. Well, I'll put the mask on first, and then I'm gonna blur it a little bit and do the same thing to confine it just to the map area. So that should technically, oops, this is a whole new layer. What did I do here? So this is wrong. Let me delete that. Okay. So this is the, okay, here we go. So I need to add the mask, and then I'm going to reveal it. and this one also already has a mask. Put a little bit of blurring because on the very edges it'll look too much contrast. And then you could technically there's a thing called reveal area, so I might do this part where the mask is. So if I hold down the Alt key, I believe it's Alt, yeah, you can trace around and have this you can decide if where you want this stuff to come through. And this is just where I have it confined to, is this in this area. So I'm noticing that the mist and stuff's a little bit too much. So I'm going to go ahead and go down to about 35 on both layers. So I don't want it too overwhelming. Okay. So now you got that swirling effect, and it kind of gives you the illusion that there's some humidity in here. And it's not too bad. I think I'm going to go down just a little bit more. So let's go down to 28. And the other one as well. Go down to around 28. There we go. And then what we could do is to give it a kind of a themed hue or lighting, since there really isn't any lighting in here, except for by these doorways. What we'll do is I'm going to put a layer of kind of like lighting, but just on these two doors. But I'm also going to put a weird layer of color and fade it out in between the two fog clouds. So again, I'm going to go to the effects layer, and I'm going to call this is going to be a color change. So we want, let's see, what is that called? Adjust colors. Okay, and see what you do with this is you can change the colors, but I'm going to make this a layer in between both mist, and then I'm going to change the color of it, but I want to put a mask on it first, and then I'm only going to mask out this area in here. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Alt key and just kind of roughly trace around the map. And I'm holding down the Alt key. And this is where the color is going to come through. And I'm going to turn it down. It's going to be subtle, so it's going to be barely noticeable. But it will look cool in the interim and during the adventure when the guys are doing this. Hey, Jim, how's it going? All right, so see, you got this kind of area here. So it kind of gives you the idea of the depth, maybe. So I'm going to go ahead and blur it a little bit so it kind of blends in. And then I'm going to turn it more of a blue color, turn down the red. And then the brightness, you can change how bright it is. And let's get rid of some more of that. And then the blur tool really helps kind of adjust it in. I wish I had more of a fade out, but what I'm going to do is kind of turn some of this stuff. There we go. It's kind of an aquatic color. And we need a little tiny bit of red in there, otherwise it's going to be too bright. And then again, I think I'll go to 75 on this. So you don't have to have that, but what you could do is when you're playing, you can turn that on. Let's say the sea cave fills up with water. So if that's the case, you can have this this water kind of give you the illusion that water has filled into the cave. So that would give you an option there. So we don't even have to have that turned on. We can turn that off and just kind of use it for a game option if need be. So what I'm going to do is make a folder. And the reason I'm doing this is, and it's down here at the bottom, is I want all those extra things kind of separated out. So I'm going to go ahead and name this effects or something like that. I'll say mist effects or something. I'll just say effects because I want them in a separate folder. I don't want 50 gazillion lines of content. So I want to go ahead and move these mist layers into the effects folder. And then this adjust color, I'm going to call this flooded tunnel, just so I remember what it's for. And that way, if I need it again, I can just kind of come through here and turn it on. So I'll leave that out of that folder. And those are basically what I have for this. So you can kind of turn that on or off if need be, kind of give you the illusion that the water is flooded in. So you kind of get that, that impression if that ever happened. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it off. Kind of leave it this way. Got the mist going on. So it looks pretty good. It's not too crazy. I could fix the mask where the mist is only going into the sea cave area, but I'm kind of lazy, so I'm just confining it to the map itself. Because like I said, this is not a commercial product. I'm not selling it to anyone. I'm just using it for my own sake and to help you guys out. So that's that. And then I'm going to actually place some lighting. So I'm going to place lighting here at the doorways. And that's the only places that are going to get lighting. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the light tool, and then you have some presets. So I want to click on probably lamp is what I want it to emulate. And it doesn't have as big a radius as, it's a little different than a torch, so that's why I chose lamp. And then I can choose a color if I want. So I might go with a kind of a bluish, light blue color to sort of match. And if you want a color match, you can use the eyedropper, and I can click on this color here to get closer to the actual color of the map and hit OK. And then once you do that, let me make sure I'm in the lighting tool, and I want to go to lamp, and then go back to my color picker again. I lost it. Okay. So go ahead and do that. Now I'm going to click where I want the lamps or the actual lighting to go. So one there and one there. So what that's going to do is when I turn this on to play mode, you'll get an idea of what it's going to look like. So I'll turn all this stuff on, and this is what it's going to look like for the players. So when they come in, if they don't have a light source, that's basically the extent of the light. So that kind of emulates the color of the light that's coming in that the author put in there, and the lighting glow kind of matches that. So that's what that's about. Now if I turn off player preview, this is the GM view, and that's going to be what it's going to look like. So that just gives you an idea. Now if you really want to test this out a little bit better than what I have here, is you bring up the combat tracker and you put some kind of NPC on there. I usually use the Acolyte. It's the first thing that comes up on the list there, so it's easier just to grab someone that doesn't have dark vision. So I'll go ahead and grab an NPC, and here's the Acolyte. Just drag him onto the combat tracker, and then drag this guy from the combat tracker onto the map. And then claim it, and then turn on the player preview, and that's what it's going to look like for the player. So it's rather dark in there. So now what I'm going to do is give this player some sort of light source just to test it out. So up here in the effects area, you can grab an effect and drag and drop it as a player or a GM, either onto the token or onto the combat tracker. I usually trust the combat tracker more than the tokens because sometimes that link gets broken. So I'm going to go ahead and take, let's say we're going to give him a candle in this case. And it looks like it works. So now that she has a candle, when she goes around in the map, she can see what's going on somewhat. And that gives the illusion that it's dark in here, and the light kind of matches. And it looks like there's a skeleton right there. I just noticed that. So there's some humanoids that were being chewed on up in here. So it looks like that is the majority of the map part of things. So the next step would be naturally to create content for it, like sea witches. I might do that. I'll just do one for right now. I'm not going to do the whole thing. But let's just say I want a coven of sea witches. So I'm going to use the NPC import tool. And this is relying on the fact that you know the formatting, or you have an idea of what the formatting should be. And what I'm going to do is click on the import text tool down here. And this is going to import the text. So I already have some text that I generated in an app that I'm going to pull up and copy and paste into this window. And this formatting has been set up for this particular adventure, and it's for the proper formatting. Okay, so I have the main witch, sea witch, Yorna. So she's a sea hag. So I'm going to copy and paste the text. You're not seeing this part, but I actually have another window open. So I'm going to hit Control Copy, Control V, and if I right click and click this wand, it'll clean up the text, get rid of the extra spaces. And there's the background here, so I want to take the background and actually copy and paste it over here on the right, because that's where this belongs. And then I'm going to put her name here, Jorna, let's see, O-R-N-A. And then I'm going to make this that, and I'm going to take the background and hit Control B for bold. And then the rest of this background here, I'm going to actually delete this because I don't want it to throw off the parsing. Now I'm going to go through and check this. So all these actions should just have a little period after it. If it doesn't, it won't parse correctly. The other thing that's commonly wrong with these is this. So the stats need to be listed in a row up here, and the numeric values down here, and there's one other format that's supported, and that is the D&D Beyond format, which will allow you to go vertically instead of horizontal. And then I'm looking at, like, here's the traits, here's the actions. So the traits, no punctuation over here. Horrific appearance has a period after it. There's actions, no punctuation, but then you have claws with a period, and then the death glare. So these are just things that you want to look for in the stat blocks, and over time you'll get used to how these should look. The other thing that goes wrong quite often is you'll have this medium humanoid with a comma, and then it will say something else with a comma and then neutral evil. If you do that, it also throws off the order of things. So it has to be exactly like this. All this is usually what's broken on character sheets or on NPC stat blocks. This part is usually broken, and then the actions usually have like a hyphen or a colon or a semicolon. You only need a period. If you have anything else, it's not going to parse. So that's just a little lesson on what to look for. And then you have your Sea Witch Jorna. This is correct. This looks right. So I kind of have a feel for what it looks like. When you stare at these enough, you can kind of tell. Zacchaeus is really good at this. If you guys ever talk to him, he can look at it and tell you right away if something's broken. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and hit import. And there's a Sea Witch. And I don't have a token for her yet, but I'm going to make one for her. And this is going to be a really cool looking Sea Witch when I'm done with it. But right now, this looks right. Everything parsed in correctly. You can tell you don't have any weirdness in here. And then on the other tab, look how beautiful that is. So I like the new import, the new formatting, because you get this kind of this table, and you get all the, like a kind of a summary. And it looks really good in the reference manual too. And right now it's just a letter S because it's a Sea Witch, but I'm going to go ahead and drag her onto the combat tracker and then put her on the map in her lair. And let's see, we got the, I want to turn off the lighting for right now. And I'm going to actually turn off the fog effects. There we go. And now what we have here is just the raw map and then the animation that's already built into it. So I'm going to put the Sea Witch, I'll just put her in this layer right here. So this is her lair. She's ready to go. And then if you click on her actions, which is this sword, there's her claws, her death glare, and her horrific appearance. So that looks right. It's parsing. So let's just pretend that the acolyte has come around this corner. The Sea Witch pops up out of her lair, out of this water, like a pool. And then she sees her. She has a higher initiative, so she's going to go first. First things first is she's going to do her horrific appearance. I'm going to drag and drop that onto the acolyte. The acolyte saved, so she didn't freak out. So that is her action, essentially, and then she's going to move and engage with the Acolyte. But what I'm going to do is hold down the Alt key, and that will emulate player and token movement, so she can move that. Her movement is 30 feet. She can swim too, so she moves up closer, and basically that's her turn. So now that that's happened, I'm going to hit the down arrow. It's the Acolyte's turn. So the Acolyte is going to bless herself. So I'm going to take the bless spell as her action, and I'm going to cast it on her. And let's grab the effect and just drag it onto herself, and that's her turn. And I think what she's going to do is pull out one of her weapons. She has a club, or she might cast another spell on her turn. So that's her turn. So now I'm going to go to this next turn, the Sea Hag. The Sea Hag is going to use her claws. So she takes her claws and starts like slashing at her and like hissing and stuff and just acting really nasty and mean. So I'm going to go ahead and why don't I have an attack roll? Huh, interesting, there was no attack roll. That's crazy. I have to look at the stat block now. It must have been something I missed. But if she had hit, she's wounded now. The Acolyte is now... oh, she hit herself. How funny. I want to delete that. Okay, so there should be an attack roll here. So I want to look at the stat block and see what's going on here, because I have a feeling it's not correct. Yeah, see, this did not parse correctly. So it only gave the damage. So these are the type of things you got to look for. So this would be a melee attack, and then you have to change that out. So if you want to use the Acolyte as an example, you could take this and do a melee attack. So it just needs that. So melee attack, weapon attack. Even though it's not a weapon, it's still considered. With a colon after it and a space. So now what I have to do is, if that happens, now it parses. So what I'm going to do is go back to this combat tracker. I'll remember her initiative was 8. So I'm going to take this off because I edited the Sea Witch. And now I'm going to take the Sea Witch from the NPCs, and this would be under uncategorized. Put her back on the combat tracker, change her initiative to 8, and then now she should be ready to go. Yeah, so, wonder what happened there. So it didn't fix that. Why is that? Oh, it didn't even save it. How weird. Okay, so I'm going to take this and delete this off again. And we need this to say melee attack. Yeah, melee weapon attack with colon. I think I edited the wrong version of it. Okay, melee weapon attack with a colon afterwards. Oh, something happened wrong. Okay, here we go. And then I need to put a space in there, because there's no melee weapon attack space. Okay, so I'm going to unlock this. Now it's parsed correctly. Now let's see if it stays on there. Yep, there's the attack roll right there. So that's all it was, is that it actually didn't parse correctly, or I didn't look at that. So now it's fixed. So now that that's there, I'm going to put the Sea Witch back on the map and make her visible. And then I want to go ahead and turn on this stuff here. So this is kind of what it would look like for the player. So the Sea Witch's turn, she did an attack roll on the Acolyte. And it was a hit. Now I'm going to use her claws to damage the Acolyte. Ooh, ouch. So the Acolyte was damaged and lost her concentration effect. So her spell went away. Now it's the Acolyte's turn. So she used one of her first slots. So I think she's going to do Cure Wounds on herself. I think at this juncture, this is the best thing. Oh, she's already unconscious, so never mind. So the Sea Witch prevails. She's got her next meal, essentially. So this is kind of what you would do to set up for an encounter, kind of test it out, make sure the lighting's correct. I think what I would do at this point is generate some artwork for the token to make it look cool. And then that's about it for this particular test and also for this video. I don't think I should go much further because it'll just get too convoluted. So I imported the maps, but I had to convert them and organize it first. Put it into Fantasy Grounds, put the line of sight on there, and in this case, I built the encounter from scratch. But you usually don't have to do that. Usually there's probably a Sea Witch already in one of your other games, like if you have Salt Marsh. And that's another thing, is if I'm going to run this, I would probably load some supplemental stuff, like maybe the Salt Marsh campaign, because it has the ships in it. So if you're going to arrive here on a ship, that might actually help you. And then, of course, you know, the player's handbook, and then maybe, I don't know, some other content that you might need for your players. But generally speaking, though, you don't need a ton of content. And once you understand how Fantasy Grounds works, this stuff gets a lot quicker. And if I wasn't explaining this and taking the time to the detail of the stuff out, it would take me a lot less time. But this is just for you guys to help you out. And if you guys have any questions for me, if you're watching right now, this would be the time to do so, because I'm going to sign off here in a few minutes. So any questions about what's happened so far, or maybe if you've stepped in late, you can go back and watch the video once I end it, because it'll scroll up to YouTube. You'll have to wait a few minutes, but it'll be live on YouTube, and you'll be able to also see the assets that I used. I listed those in the description of the video. So this is just a game prep thing that you guys might go through if you're going to be using Fantasy Grounds. Now, if you're new to Fantasy Grounds, some of this stuff is going to be Greek to you until you get used to the platform. But generally speaking, this is the flow of things when it comes to creating content. Most of this type of thing would apply, except for the combat part, most of this would apply in 90% of the rule sets, especially a fantasy-based one like Pathfinder, or even the horror games. Anything that's similar to D&D, it just definitely work. Cyberpunk, even Call of Cthulhu. It just depends on, but Call of Cthulhu has more images and handouts and more theater of the mind, so I don't know if half of this stuff would apply unless you use maps. But hopefully that helps. I did a vote in YouTube that asked for the type of content that people wanted. This was one of the things that we touched on, using the animated maps. So this was a way to kind of show that, but also show the amount of work and steps that can be involved with creating your own content. So anyhow, folks, take care. If you haven't joined the Fantasy Grounds Academy yet, those links will be in the videos and that sort of thing. And then we give out classes. I think this Tuesday I'm going to run a GM course, which is going to cover kind of setting up and getting prepared for your adventures. And then later in the month, I have a map class that kind of goes over doing line of sight. And then near the end of the month, I have an audio integration set up.